Hello, welcome to another in our series of short videos explaining various aspects of the utility of the Greek and Latin tree banks, which one can find built under the sponsorship of the Perseid Digital Library and the Perseids project, and as I say, have a myriad of valuable uses. Today we're going to talk about using the tree banking tools in elementary Latin classrooms. I've been doing this in my beginning Latin class for several years now. At more senior levels of Latin, I've been using trees for even longer than that. Now, this video contains a brief run-through of some of the capabilities of the program and how I have found ways to use them in my elementary class. And I'm sure there are many other approaches that can be equally successful and equally valuable. This video is in aid to the workshop, which has been planned for this coming January. It will be held in Toronto in near coincidence with the annual meeting of the Society of Classical Studies on January the 4th through the 5th of 2017. This workshop will be held at the Weston Harbour Hotel in Toronto, and it is free and open to the public. If you're interested in learning how to use these tools for classroom use, for research, for your own enrichment, however your preferences may lead you, please consider joining us in this workshop in Toronto in January. Now, one of the great things about the way the system is configured, the Perseid system is configured for tree banking, is that it is easy to put together assignments for your students. Essentially what you do is that you open a file containing, you create a tree bank file containing whatever sentences you want. I often will just copy sentences from the workbook or the textbook that I'm using. You submit these in a very simple way, a very straightforward process, and then you use this as the basis of what becomes your students' homework and your own gold standard file. And so you create a gold standard by filling in what you feel are the correct answers, doing the correct version of the tree for a particular sentence. And the students then have a list of the sentences, which is more of a blank canvas, and they use this to fill in their versions. And that's essentially the kind of structure that underlies the use of this program in elementary classrooms. Now, one of the great things about the Perseids is how easy it is for your students to access their homework assignments, for example, their tree bank sentences. Basically, it comes down to a link, a simple link. Here I've provided a link to the students through their Blackboard page for the course, and the student comes along and clicks on that link, and the program generates a list of sentences, and these sentences would then be available for them to do for their homework. Now, we've had other videos show you the steps in basic tree banking. I won't go through those, but I will point out that there's a very useful feature here that one can turn on by clicking this compare button. Now we return to the same file, but this has enabled a really useful feature by which the students can check how they're doing in their work as they go along. So I'm going to quickly put together a incorrect version of this sentence, and then we will see how things work. So, for example, I will incorrectly identify nauta as singular feminine dative, so that there is at least one or two mistakes in the sentence for our function, our correction function, our comparison function to evaluate. All right, well, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I don't want to take your time while I fill out this sentence, so we'll skip ahead to a completed version of this. Okay, I've filled in the morphology for this sentence. I have, however, left the labels, the syntax labels, the relationship labels, untagged, because I want to show you a little bit about the tag set. So let's go to NowTie and open a tag. You see that this tag set is different than the one that you may have seen on other videos. It's not the standard tag set one finds on the Perseid treebanks. That's because the Perseid system allows very great flexibility in generating tag sets. Lots of tag sets are available, and different ones are appropriate for different uses. This tag set is designed after the first 3 chapters in Wheelock, includes the essentially the tags that are appropriate for my class from that text and that part of that text. And so, as you might infer from that statement, it is not impossible to generate your own tag set and install it into the system. So if one of the available tag sets isn't appropriate, other tag sets can be generated. All right, so here I'm going to call NowTie the indirect object because I have misunderstood it as a dative. Populum will go ahead and be correct and identify that as a direct object. We'll say Romanum. Oh, I think that's part of the direct object, so I'm going to call it a direct object too. My students make this mistake frequently. And here I'm going to call the main verb the main verb. All right, I save it, and now I click on this little review tab over here on the right, and then we have a compare button. I hit compare, and you now see that things, let me enlarge it, things have changed. We have color coding for various correct and incorrect bits of information. So NowTie, the word itself is red because, if you recall, I misidentified it. It's a singular feminine dative, so the morphology is wrong. On the other hand, populum is listed as a noun, singular masculine accusative, Romanum as an adjective, singular masculine accusative, servant is a verb of the appropriate flavor. So those are all black, and no mistake. Note as well that NowTie has a red label. Indirect object is incorrect, and so the computer has told the student this. Likewise, Romanum is not correct. Romanum represents 2 errors, at least. The direct object tag is incorrect, and the red color of this line joining servant and Romanum indicates the dependency is not correct. That Romanum should not be dependent upon servant, but of course, according to our principles of dependency, on populum. So let's make this change. We'll change Romanum to populum. We'll save it. Reload it sometimes. Becomes useful. Then we'll go back and invoke the review modality again. And now you can see that the red line has turned to black. It now properly joins Romanum and Populum, although the label has remained red, because I'm still wrong about that. I don't call all parts of a direct object, all dependencies, but only the head of that particular subtree. Romanum is properly an attributive adjective, and if we made that change, it would show as correct. We don't need, however, to belabor the point. You can see perhaps how this can be quite useful, supplying the students with guidance, but we should note that it does not reveal the right answer. It only tells them the wrong answer. They have to search out the correct answer either by reasoning it or sometimes, I suppose, by trial and error. Now that we've seen how certain features of the Perseid system work from the student's point of view, let's briefly look at the instructor's view and the instructor's benefits. Now here I've pulled up another list of sentences, a different list. This is one that I've been used earlier this semester in my third semester Latin class, so slightly more complicated sentences. And let's take this opportunity to briefly look once again at the relation tag set. You see here this one is much more extensive than the one for the beginning Latin students, as one would expect. And furthermore, we've found it useful to nest some of the tags under the case that they're generally associated with. For example, here under ablative we have a large variety of the labels that might be associated with the ablative most frequently, or under the clause heading we have a good number of various kinds of clauses that the students might come into contact with. So, in any case, again, a reminder of the extensibility and flexibility of the tag set in the Perseid system, which I find is very good. It's very good. Back out then to our sentence list, and here I will just say, note that there is a function along the top, compare. And if I click on that, and I won't do it right now, but if I click on it, then another screen will be generated. If I can find it, here, it will look like this. Now I'm skipping the actual generation because it takes sometimes 30 seconds. And so just to save time, this screen contains a long link, and this link basically will compare to the gold standard all of the work of each of my individual students. And if I click on that, I'm given a list of student files that looks like this. And then, as you've seen, because I had it open, if I click again, we get a more detailed representation of the file. This student, multimilites, etc., is the sentence. Sentence number 2 in the homework. This student did quite well. They made no mistakes under the category of head, which means where they locate the dependencies. The head of a word is the word from which it depends. So the student got the tree shape of the tree correct. The student also got every relationship tag correct. On the other hand, there's some red under the lemma, and that's really odd. How could such a good student make such mistakes in the lemma? Well, this is partly just an artifact of the writing system. It's orthographical, in that I tell the students that I may and often will use a long mark. They don't have to use a long mark, and so on. So there might be simple reasons. So we can check, and I always check by hand the lemma category. by eye. And so here I'll put my cursor on adferebant, and I'll see that in green I wrote afero as the proper lemma, and the student wrote adfero. And obviously this doesn't represent a mistake. It's simply orthographical convention. Also, we see here qui has the index 1, whereas I took qui index 2. This is from the morphological section of the program. Will suggest, if you want it to, what form the word is. And when there is more than one form, like in qui, it separates them with index number. But this just essentially can lead to mistakes, and I would advise students to avoid indexing. So we see sum is listed here as sum number 1, whereas I don't have an index on mine. So there are minor glitches that you have to worry about. But note, and I forgot to bring it up earlier, that you can turn on or turn off the morphological parsing function of the program. So for my beginning students, I turn it off, and I want them to do all the work, to write the lemma, to figure out, using the lexicon or the vocabulary lists in their books, the form of each individual word. At more advanced levels, I assume that students have much of this underlying knowledge, and that all I ask them to do is pick the correct form from the list the computer suggests. So when I'm grading, anyway, I go through, I see for head and relation, pretty much I just take the numbers, 100 in one category, 100 in the next category. Here, for this 50, I say, oh, that's not going to be right. Give the student credit for qui, for nuntius, for adfero, but not for sum 1, but not for interfacio. And here, for some reason, in the post tag, which is where the category, which is where the morphological information is, this student thought that qui was a noun for some reason, and not a pronoun, as should have been listed. So that I would leave as wrong. On the other hand, this person assumed that nuntium was the masculine. I had in mind nuntium, the neuter, not nuntius. Again, I would give the student credit for that. Well, in any case, that's not really important. What is important is that you can grade a great deal of information very quickly. You can see on this particular student has generated quite a few data points, and from a class you get really a large amount of data where you can put your finger on precisely what kind of mistakes your students are making, precisely which words they're having trouble with. Of course, we can do this in the old-fashioned way, but not as many times in a semester for each student. We can call on them, we can ask them to translate, we can see whether they understand how to deal with a certain construction or not. But it's very difficult, at least for me, in the size of classes that I teach, to get around to each student with each bit of information I'm trying to see whether they understand. Now, I'll close on the note that I sometimes get the objection that the computer provides the students with too much help, with too much information. For example, if it tells them when the forms they choose are correct, when the relationships they choose are properly tagged, when they've gotten their dependencies correct, this is the computer doing the work and not the students doing the work. And I like to reply, I thought there was something to that at first myself, I will say. But then I looked into the math a little bit. And it turns out that for a sentence like this, where the student did just perfectly well on the shape of the tree and the labeling of the tree, there are, well, the math is quite interesting. It turns out, if you look into it, that it's very unlikely that the computer is giving the students too much help. We see that this is essentially a sentence of 9 words. So, what does that mean? Well, it turns out that the number of possible trees of the form that we're trying to create is basically n to the power of n minus 2, with n being the number of words in your sentence. So here we have 9 words in the sentence, if I read it correctly, and so we would take 9 to the 7th power, and that's how many possible trees there are, one of which is correct. So that, again, if I'm not entirely mistaken, is 4,782,000, etc. So the student would have to do a good deal of work to randomly come up with the correct answer. So I'm very proud of this student who managed to produce the correct tree with the correct labels on this particular sentence. All right, well, thanks for listening, and if you are interested in this kind of thing, get in contact with us, and perhaps plan to attend the workshop in Toronto in January. Thank you very much.